This is When the Fuck Did I Become Old? The fun, edgy and unapologetically honest podcast about the experiences of aging, where, as the name suggests, nothing is off the table. And I'm your host, Jo Parker.
And I'm Kev. And this week, we're going to talk about the generation game, which is really a competition between all the different generations, Gen Z, boomers, millennials, the whole bit.
Do we have it best?
Well, so that's the debate, right?
We're boomers, by the way. Do the boomers have it
We're
best?
only just.
Well, you say that. We still have that argument.
But-
You are a boomer.
But we do, obviously, as we have kids, all 4 kids Gen Z.
All 4 kids are Gen Z.
So we're often on the receiving end of, woe is me, we've got it really tough. You guys had it easy type of dialogues, right? And so to put that to bed, we happened to come across an article in the Sunday Times actually the other week,
It was
which
Saturday
was
Times.
really, really good. Because it just kind of looked at that question of the different challenges that each of the generations had in a slightly different way. So let's just set out what the 4 generations actually are that we're talking about here, and the time periods, because we do disagree about those ourselves.
Well, only because you would like to
sometimes.
squish yourself into Gen X.
There's a good reason for that.
I know.
You'll find out.
No, I know.
There's a good reason.
I know.
But so boomers, who the hell are they? 1945 to 1964, year of birth, right? So technically, we are right at the end of the
We are
boomer
right
thing.
at the end of boomers.
Gen X, 1965 to 1980.
Yep.
Millennials, 81 to 96. And then Gen Z, born 1997 to 2012.
Yep.
And every single one of those generations has had a hard thing at some point in their time. And so there are some key things that people will talk about all the time that are unique to a particular generation. Just to give you a couple of examples. So we say us, late boomers, early Gen X, suffered with the 1980s mortgage rate crisis, right? Where mortgage rates were 15 to 17%.
Well,
Right, so that's never been seen before,
No.
never been seen since.
And hopefully will never be seen
was
again.
absolutely catastrophic, right? Gen X, what's the big thing that they've really sort of got to live with? The fact that they are the first generation who aren't going to get the final salary pension.
Yeah.
So
Well, and some boomers.
some boomers, but as a generation, most boomers got it. We didn't, but I mean, most boomers did. But Gen X, their big thing is they're not going to have the pension.
Yeah. Okay. Millennials?
Gen Z, well, we'll come to millennials in a minute, but Gen Z will say, okay, can't afford a house, blah, 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 can't get a job, etc.
Absolutely.
So those are kind of some of the stereotypical things. But what we're going to look at is 5 different categories, because what was really interesting about
In
this
this article, I know. It's not...
they said, look, you can't just simplify it to one thing. It's much more multidimensional. And so they looked at the differences that each of those generations has experienced on like 5 different categories.
Yeah.
One was housing, one was wages, one was consumer good prices, another one was relationships, and then there's the whole retirement thing. What does retirement look like for that generation, and how well positioned are they for that? So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, okay.
Walk you through that, because some of this stuff I think is just absolutely, totally going to resonate with you.
Yeah,
that's absolutely.
And it's interesting as well, some of the facts and figures that we came across as,
So let's start off with housing then,
Okay.
and look at some of the sort of key differences there. So just for a bit of reference about changes through the generations, right, and how things have changed there. By the sort of benchmark age of 30,
Okay.
50% of boomers owned a home. Right, so that's like a life event, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a huge percentage. Millennials, when they were 30, on average, only 46%
Okay.
owned a home. So indicating that it was somehow slightly harder or somehow slightly more expensive. Now, you can argue about the expensive thing of houses because there's a dislocation there between house prices and interest rates, right? So house prices have gone up, interest rates gone down. Okay, is affordability the same? We can get into that. But something that we're also seeing, and this was a really sort of great little stat they came up with, was if you go, well, okay, how much are people paying for their mortgages? Like in the first 5 years of having a mortgage, how expensive is it to actually do that?
All right.
On an average property for an average person in that generation, blah, 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 blah. And so...
First time buyer.
Yeah, first time buyer.
Okay.
So adjusted to today's prices, right, and today's money. So boomers in their first 5 years of having a mortgage, in today's money, paid about 41.5.
Oh, in today's money.
In today's
Okay,
money,
right.
paid about £41,500 over that 5-year period in today's money
Okay.
in their mortgage. Gen X paid about 51, so a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
Right? Gen Z are having to pay 73.8.
Oh, okay. That's painful.
So that is quite a chunky uplift in terms of the cost of housing as a representation of percentage of your disposable income. It's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger. And although, I mean, the other thing that is a bit of a feature that if you were, I mean, I definitely went through it, and the Gen X guys went through it. We had it for a bit, then we lost it. MIRAS.
Oh, yes.
Mortgage interest
God, yeah.
relief at source. I can remember in the early 80s and late 80s.
They stopped that,
They
didn't
stopped
they?
it in 88. There was this big sort of, I can remember there was a stamp.
Oh, it was a joint one as well.
There was
You know, partners,
yeah. There was a stamp duty war as well. That if you didn't get your property by a certain date, you didn't qualify for MIRAS.
Yeah, I know.
So I can remember, because I bought that with a friend. I can remember the sort of race for like trying to complete the property purchase in 88. I think
in the housing, you think
boomers win.
boomers win.
So it is unquestionable.
Boomers win.
On the housing dimension,
Yeah.
you kind of can't really argue
then
that
got to
boomers had a better deal in terms of
However,
cost
got to look at wages as well, because wages against housing.
Indeed.
So
Different
if you
dimension.
look, so the section that I had on wages was quite interesting. So in versus and to the house ratio, because they're married. So the house ratio. So in 1975, a house on the average house was 4.2 times the salary.
Yep.
Okay.
1975. Okay,
1975.
Gotcha.
In 2025, according to this article, an average house was 7.6 times the salary. So yes,
House price inflation.
House price
gone
inflation,
up hugely.
absolutely. Interestingly enough, though, you did a little exercise, didn't you? After having read this article, you had a little look to see what your first flat
I did.
was on the market
Yes.
for now. And
How
actually
spooky.
it was on the market. Your exact flat was on the market
It was
the day
on the market
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
My exact flat.
Your
I was
exact
looking at the
flat.
photos going, that's my flat.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did an experiment, didn't you, of
I did.
how much it is, how much you paid for it in 1988,
Yeah.
and basically what you thought your starting salary was compared to what somebody who was starting in the same industry would be.
Yeah.
You didn't think it was that much different, did you?
It wasn't for me. So if I look at that, so back in the day, 88, my first flat, which I bought with a friend because I couldn't afford, so it's worth saying, this picture of like, oh, you could just go buy a house. I couldn't buy a house. I was a graduate with a great degree. I had to club together with a mate to buy a 2-bed flat.
Yeah.
In Silvertown. So back in those days, so the flat was 85 grand. At the time, my salary just been uplifted actually from 8.5 grand to 12, and I think it was 12.5. So quick bit of maths, that makes the flat 7 times
Your own salary.
my own personal salary, which is why I couldn't afford to buy it alone, right? So the two of us had to get it together, and then we got like a 3.5 times salary mortgage.
Yeah.
And that's how we could afford the flat. Now, the exact same flat was on the market last week. 400 grand.
Right.
So that's gone up 5 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And for the job I do, I was working for an investment bank back then. If you got for an investment bank as a 1-year plus graduate, now you're probably looking at about 50. You're certainly looking at 40, depending on the specific
So it's exactly
role.
400, was it, or slightly over 400? Your flat.
I think it was a smidge over, but I can't remember the
So we're
precise
talking
number.
8 point something. So not a massive uplift.
Yeah,
in
no, it's
percentage.
8 point something. Yeah.
So somebody would
So-
be able to afford it if they
so
bought
it's
it with
not-
somebody else.
So for my industry,
Yeah.
my background, and for my exact flat,
Yeah.
it's gone up a bit, absolutely.
but
it hasn't gone up by a bizarre percentage.
By what they're saying here of 4.2 to 7.6. But also, so
But don't forget, that's a national average, right? And obviously some locations are more expensive than others.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought I looked at that and I thought, wow, actually, that's okay.
Yeah, it is okay. It's okay. So we were looking at this article looked at low skilled workers, and it says in the boomers, even when we were not white collar workers, blue collar workers, 63% of them owned a home by the age of 35.
Yeah.
Which is huge. Whereas go into the millennials, which is 1981 to 1996, that was only 42% of them owned a home. And then we go into Gen Z, where 45% of them who are unemployed at 24 have never had a job. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what the minimum wage is, whether or not there's been uptick in minimum wage or not, or percentage-wise, they are not working. The other thing that they were talking about in Gen Z, and that also flips into why a lot of them are more unemployed than when we were younger, is that a lot of them are coming out of university and not following a professional career. And I think that's for two reasons. I think one, of course, we've got the AI thing.
No, that's too new. That's too new.
It isn't too new.
That's too
It isn't
new.
new. And then
no one's going to have made a career choice about that in the last 2 years.
Well, it's not the career choice, it's the lack of opportunities as well. So why do you think then Gen Z are coming out of university and not following a career for life choice? I think
so they aren't studying the same subjects.
Right. All right. Okay.
There's been a shift in profile in students.
Okay.
So if you look at the number of degrees people take, the popularity of various topics, blah, 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 they're not studying the same subjects.
Well, they've got so much more choice. So
they are. But they're not doing the same subjects, right? And they're choosing more art subjects. They're choosing more soft science subjects, if you want to call things like,
they're encouraged, aren't they, by the fact that
sciences.
They can get a loan and do whatever they like.
Well, so then you get into another problem over the last 40, 50 years, which is that not that many people used to go to university, and there weren't that many universities. Yeah. And so I think it was only like 1 in 7 18-year-olds went to university in like 1983 or 1984. And now it's like 1 in 3.
Right. If not more, surely. But we don't know the stats.
So it's huge now, the millions of kids that go to university. Absolutely
So they're
insane
coming
now.
out of university with a degree that isn't a traditional degree, therefore they're not going into the career. And they are finding in the last few years that the basic level jobs aren't available. So you were talking to a friend
so there has been a
who's got a
compression.
daughter whose daughter's got a post. She's an MA as well in media studies. Couldn't find 150 odd job applications. Couldn't find one.
Yeah. So there's absolutely a compression in graduate recruitment, but it's not.
But it is AI. It is AI driven.
Well, maybe this year. Prior to this year, no way.
Yeah,
too new.
It's not that new. It might be new to you, but it isn't that new. So So in terms of where we sat wages.
Yeah.
Are we much different? Were our wages less or more, and are we better off than
so it varies by age
Gen-
group, right, on the wages front?
Yeah.
Because in the surveys they were doing, wages are up
now
if you're under 20.
percentage wise?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're up 20% in real terms if you're under 20. Why? Because of the huge changes that have taken place to the national minimum wage and national living wage, and 16-year-olds have got a new floor as well.
Yeah.
So those numbers are up 20%. Where it's flat, it's actually flat between the ages of 20 and 27 on average.
Okay, so the minimum wage hasn't changed.
Well, this isn't about minimum. So 20 to 27-year-olds aren't really impacted by a minimum wage because they're going for careers.
All right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So your minimum wage thing is kids, people working in shops, people on £12 an hour, £13 an hour, like that those bar work, hospitality, well, basically that's your minimum wage stuff. 20 to 27, where you're getting into whatever your chosen career is, on average, according to the Times, it's actually flat in real terms, right? Between, and that was measured over 2005, so 20 years ago, to now.
Okay.
So they're saying over 20 years, there's been no real decrease
Percentage
or
change.
increase
Okay.
in relative terms. Above 27, it is down.
Okay.
Right. So it is down above 27, but that again changes by industry. So then you get into specifics about which industry's gone up, which industry's gone down.
So which generation's got the wages best then?
So it's an age group thing, isn't it? So I think in real terms, you're probably looking at Gen X. Gen X had a pretty good time on wages, actually.
Interesting.
Let's move on to consumer goods.
Shall we use on? Yeah, that's made interesting.
So this was really
topic.
weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really weird topic
Yeah.
to choose as a benchmark. 'Cause
But it's
not,
interesting.
It's not like the
Yeah.
cost of a
No, but-
price of pint of come on to the bread and milk thing. In a
Yeah,
minute.
absolutely.
But they weren't measuring grocery baskets. But let's start with the milk thing.
Yeah,
because
let's start
the
with
thing, as I
milk.
mentioned,
That's
milk. So
fascinating.
they had a really fascinating metric about when you look at the prices of things, how do you measure price over time? And one of the ways that the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, measures prices, one of the ways, is actually how many working minutes it takes someone to buy a pint of milk
Okay.
on average
Yeah,
national wage, right? So an average national wage. In 1975, so was that 50 years ago?
Yeah.
1975, the average worker would have to work 8 minutes
To earn a pint of milk.
to earn a pint of milk.
Okay. And now?
Now, in 2026, it's 2 minutes.
So you're saying pint of milk cheaper
Yeah,
quite considerably by 75%.
yeah,
Wow.
relative to wages.
Yeah, relative wages.
So
Interesting.
some things cheaper. There you
Yeah.
go, milk. Tech toys.
Oh,
Now,
cheaper.
this was a really interesting thing because, I mean, obviously there's a continual reduction in the price of commoditized technology,
Yeah,
right?
cool.
But they took LCD screens or LCD TVs
Yeah.
as an example of something which today is a ubiquitous product that people will go and buy. Is that cheaper? Is that more expensive? So obviously, if you go way back, you go back to 82, and I can remember buying my first plasma in about, oh, Jesus, when was that? I didn't buy a plasma until about 2001, actually, because they were too expensive.
Very
I couldn't
expensive.
afford
No,
one.
no, they're
right?
really expensive.
But they were saying,
Wow.
again, in today's money, if you were to try and buy an LCD screen in 1982, £4,500. Right?
Yeah.
If you were to try and buy one in 2004,
Yeah.
£769 in today's money.
Okay. And now?
Now, 279.
Wow.
So some things like that, which one might
consumer
consider
goods.
a luxury. I don't know. Maybe it was.
We had it- we had it tough.
You'd call it an essential now. Probably you'd say I have to have an
We had
LCD
it tough.
television. But
And if you tell the kids today, they won't believe you.
well, if you go back to our parents' days, they had to rent tellies. They couldn't
Yeah,
afford
yeah.
to buy
I remember
them.
my parents renting a TV.
Nobody I knew when I
No,
was a
I
kid
remember-
even
yeah.
owned a television.
Yeah.
You had to rent it by the week.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's an example of a technical commodity that has become infinitely cheaper, but is now considered a must-have, right?
Well, not just a must-have, but it's also it's easy to have. It's much easier to have, and
It's not
and you can
expensive.
chuck it out
It's not expensive.
in a couple of years and get a newer, more sparkly, techie model because it's a couple £100. Whereas our parents are probably paying that a year to rent their TV.
Now, next thing I looked at, the cost of eating out,
Okay,
which interestingly, big societal change there actually, because people eat out a lot now.
all the time.
Much more than they ever used to. So eating out, genuinely cheaper now than in 1991. So if you go back, what's that, 35 years?
Yeah. Yes.
35 years. So the average cost of eating out is significantly
Down.
cheaper
Yeah.
relative to
So yeah, because
income.
kids go out. Well, I say kids. I'm
And-
talking Gen Z.
And also eating out's been normalised as
Yeah.
a luxury. So
But it's not a luxury.
No.
It's been normalised.
it's been totally normalised. So people would expect to eat out once a week, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
So the other thing that you spotted that wasn't in this article you wanted to talk about was coffee and subscriptions.
Right. So something that is a hidden, what's the word? Lifestyle creep.
Yeah.
Lifestyle creep, right?
Lifestyle creep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I need to do this for myself because I haven't done it,
Yeah.
but I do
That
need
is
to
a
do it.
lifestyle creep.
I
It's
do
a
need to
cost
do it
creep, isn't it?
in a spreadsheet. But again, I mean, if you go back in the day, even when I graduated, I might buy like one cup of tea a day. When I was at work, 1987, I'd get a cup of tea in the morning.
Would you get a cup of tea on the way in, or would you make it when you got to work? We all make. Well, we made ours.
I got it. Used to get it on the way in actually from Benji's. Used to get a cup of tea and a bacon bap. I seem to remember
Yum.
with brown sauce. But that would be it. I wouldn't like. I don't think tea was like God, less than £1. I don't know, really, really cheap.
Yeah.
But and we didn't really have. You didn't have the ubiquitous, Starbucks coffee model that you have today, right? So
With all the
nobody
choices
would
you
have.
get now.
In fact, I don't even remember having had a cappuccino in my entire life at the age of 24. I don't think I'd ever had one. Where the hell would you get one?
Don't know.
There was nowhere to get one.
I'm
I
trying to
may
think
have heard
that.
about it in a film, But coffee's now completely normalized.
Absolutely.
And the whole matcha latte thing with Gen Z, totally out of control. It's all over TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I was looking at that, I checked out the Starbucks menu
Okay.
last week for their latest, pistachio, frappuccino, blah, 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 which is
blah, blah.
exactly the kind of thing that Gen Z would go for. £7.20.
Okay. So we're having those one a day. How much is that?
They're going to have more than one. So
Let's just. Okay. So how many are you going to go? You're going to be like 14, 15 quid a day.
probably 2. So if you're doing
Full up.
whatever the latest feature drink is at Starbucks,
At 15 quid a day for 2.
that's £7.20 a time. That's not cheap, right? So, and that kind of stuff,
So much is about 400 quid a month.
yeah. £4.50, if you have it every day.
So if you're having one a day, it's 225 a month.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And subscriptions, and this is the thing I definitely am guilty of, actually, and Gen Z are hopelessly guilty of,
Well, it's because it's so
because
easy.
they live on their phones, right? So
Yeah.
everything is a subscription. So every app is a subscription.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I
then you forget to
genuinely
cancel
worry
it.
for myself, actually, at how many subscriptions I have. I suspect it is a very scary number.
Yes, I suspect it
And
is.
I need to work it out and do something about it.
Go back to the plan
But-
for retirement.
But that coffee and subscription phenomenon
Yeah.
is a hidden. You can't even benchmark that
Yeah.
because you can't go, what was that like 45 years ago? It didn't
Cost
exist.
of living. Yeah.
Didn't exist, so you can't even measure it.
Yeah.
But that's a whole feature of life now, where you would go, well, I need all my subscriptions, whatever they are, whether they're Netflix or
Well,
or
I challenge
Spotify,
that.
wherever
The
it
thing
is.
what you do is you subscribe to something for a week or 2 where it's free, and then you forget.
Yeah, no,
And that
I'm
all-
totally with
all
you,
of
but I'm
those
saying
8 quid
people
a
would
month.
never,
Yeah.
people wouldn't even consider that. Like they go,
Yeah.
no, I have to have
No.
I have to have a subscription for extra iCloud
Netflix,
storage,
yeah,
for this,
absolutely.
that, for
Yeah.
Apple TV, yada yada yada.
Go on.
Disney
Yeah.
Plus, it goes on, Netflix,
Yeah.
Sky, etc., etc. Before you know it,
Yeah.
it's a massive number.
It is a massive number.
So I need to have a look at that myself.
You do.
So,
where does that fit then? Where does everybody sit in terms of cost of living or not cost of living, consumer goods, us now versus us boomers
So-
when we were young?
So
And-
where they ended up was a lot of things in consumer goods land are actually cheaper now.
Okay.
The problem in consumer goods land is the expectation shift, in that the things that are cheaper now, you would have considered a luxury 30, 40 years ago, and
Okay.
you wouldn't have said, I have to have it. So
Yeah,
if I can afford it, I will buy that thing.
Yeah.
But now you just go, I have to have it. It's like nobody questions going to the news. No one questions, shouldn't I upgrade to an iPhone 17?
Yeah.
They do it.
Yeah.
And you don't go, I haven't got £1,000 spare to do that.
No, well, you borrow money, don't you? Do it on a monthly basis.
Right. So you
Yeah.
go, no, I'll just sign a 3-year contract. That'll be fine.
Yeah.
So there's a lifestyle creep issue there.
Yeah.
So again, very, very hard thing to benchmark, because things that
Different.
are essential now were not essential then. But but a fascinating little insight into that one.
Definitely. They do the cost of milk. That's incredible. So the other thing that one of the other things that they did was they looked at marriage and the stats, because marriage is less popular now. When as you quoted in an episode a couple of weeks ago, it's like 50% of people are getting divorced.
Yeah.
So people aren't getting married. So in 1973, there were registered 4,000 marriages in the UK. In 2023...
400,000.
Sorry, 400,000. Yeah, sorry, what did I say?
4,000.
400,000, right. Sorry.
So in the year 1973.
In the year 1973, births, deaths and marriages, 400,000.
Right. Okay.
In 2023, 224,400.
So that's 50 years later.
50 years later. And
nearly half the volume.
Yeah, absolutely, nearly half the volume. And also what this stats brought up is that in 1975, which is boomer, the average age of a marriage, a man was 25 and a woman was 23. Gen X, average age is 28 for a man, 26 female. Millennial, 35 for a man, 33 for a female.
Okay, so it's crept up a decade.
It's crept up a decade in 2 generations, and Gen Z are even less likely to get married, allegedly, than before, or have kids as well. So having the kids thing has changed too. So what they were saying is that, and we've talked about this, we're in danger of, as we get older, of having less people younger to look after us, basically. So what they were saying is that in 1964, which is roughly our age, that's the beginning of Gen X, or the end of the boomers.
Yeah.
It was the average family had on average had 2.93 children, so nearly 3 children. In 1975, 1.78, and in 2024, 1.41. So we are in danger of actually becoming just a one-child family, which has all sorts of ramifications in terms of socialization, in terms of actually what we're going to be putting forward, and in terms of getting married and continuing with the human race. Well, that's another subject matter. But so who's got it best? Have Gen Z got it best? Have millennials? Have we got it best? That we have marriages?
So those stats, well, they mask a number of different things, but they mask a number of different social changes, right? So
true.
So back in our day, as they say, it was absolutely the expectation that you would get married.
Yeah.
With no questions asked.
No.
I didn't even know anybody who wasn't married when I was a kid. Like, it was just everybody was married.
Everybody was married. And very few people were divorced.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Of our parents' generation.
Absolutely, because, again, legally, the legislation was not yet in place that enabled no-fault divorce, right? So you need to have particular reasons for it. Yeah. And then the odds on the female partner getting a successful financial outcome from that in the 60s is very, very slender, right? Yeah. So there's been the legalization, if you like, or facilitation of divorces clearly resulted in less people being married.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. And therefore you've got more evidence that those things don't work, and therefore people go, well, why would I bother doing that? So I mean, that's just a sort of a social trend there, where you've got a bunch of relaxations of standards and relaxations of legislation that enable you to have different outcomes. So you're going to have different outcomes. But the interesting thing, I think, is the age and the baby thing is interesting. The fact that people are getting married later. I mean, obviously, I didn't get married. I mean, it's funny that actually. So they said, what, millennial was 35 for a man.
You're not a millennial.
Gen X 28. Boomer 25.
I didn't get married.
I was 39.
I didn't get married.
You never got married.
Z. Yeah.
Right. So there you are. So I was 39 when I got married. So people getting married later, absolutely, it's a thing. And kids are expensive.
We know.
So I totally get why people are having less of them.
Yeah.
Because it's not cheap.
No.
But what you don't see there, because it's too early, right? Because those stats were only
we haven't seen what Gen Z
boomers, Gen X, and millennial, right? So you haven't got the Gen Z in there because they're not quite old enough yet to go through that. But
it'd be really difficult.
They're starting to get into it now.
Well, some of Emmanuel's friends are getting married, but it's very difficult for us to go, well, who's got it right? Who wins here? Because we're basically looking at a generation game, and Who's got it right? Because that being said, that it's difficult to say what Gen Z are doing, but at the other end, there's a lot of what they're calling now silver divorce, and we'll get a silver divorce. We're going to get a divorce lawyer on at some stage. Talk about people who've actually kids left home and they're going, fuck for that. I no longer have to sit with you and pretend. So,
I mean, you could argue that there is a way to argue that trend's actually a positive thing, because you kind of go, you're only doing what you want to, and you're doing it when you want to.
Yeah.
Now, you could also argue that we have to consider the fact that some of those things are more challenging to do. So it's more challenging to bring up kids now.
Yeah.
It's more challenging to get married, get a house, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, true.
But so then moving on then to the final chapter, retirement. So let's have a look at what they had to say about
what did they have
how
to say
each
about
generation is teed up,
retirement?
or what challenges each generation faces
We'll
with
have
regards to
four
their own
retirement, okay.
retirement. So, right, there is this big assumption, we mentioned it at the beginning, there is a big assumption, big generalization in the papers that all boomers had gold-plated final salary pensions and are, the evil nemesis, right, to be despised. So it's true, a lot of them did.
Yeah.
Some didn't.
Yes.
Neither of us.
Neither of us, sadly.
So we don't have it. But for those that did, absolutely
Lovely, happy
amazing.
days.
Laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
Fantastic. When you got into Gen X, they didn't really get it because the pensions were starting to be decommissioned by the time Gen X were in the workforce. So
plus the fact that actually Job for Life was getting less and less.
It was incrementally, yeah. So for Gen X, absolutely. Now, if you look at so given that Gen X aren't going to get that, and they have to save for it in what would be called a defined contribution scheme, not a defined benefit scheme.
Yeah.
Then when they look at the amount of savings that Gen X have, only 54% of Gen X surveyed were deemed to have adequate levels of saving for their retirement. So that's giving flesh to the fact that they're not getting the final salary stuff, and they are the first generation to face like a cliff edge.
Right.
Although both you and I face that too, as we mentioned, because we're not on the defined benefit thing.
Some boomers face it. Yeah.
Now, one aspect of the Gen X population, so 2 million people in the Gen X population don't yet actually own a house and therefore don't have housing wealth to fall back on. So that's going to be particularly tricky if you're in that particular profile, right? And when you go, well, okay, why is it that Gen X is so badly hurt, apart from the fact that the DBS thing sort of started to
why haven't
roll
they
off?
got a house?
Well, no, not why they haven't got a house, but why is their pension provision, why is their own savings not sufficient? So one of the reasons is that nowadays, and in fact since 2012, there's been this phenomenon of auto-enrolment, which is that everybody has to be enrolled in an employer's pension somewhere, right? That didn't happen before 2012, right? And I can remember in my 20s, I was asked to opt out of SERPs or something at the time. I didn't even understand what it was, but I did opt out of it.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know. I don't even know why.
No, I don't either.
And definitely there was a period in the 90s to the noughties where if you were working in that time, you could very easily end up with no pension provision at all because it wasn't enforced.
No.
It was entirely elective.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, none of us really understood what that meant. None of us really understood that the state pension wasn't going to be much. Yeah. And none of us really understood the exposure of not being a defined benefit pension. So people working in that zone, and I was one of them, have got gaps in their savings profile. Now, fast forwarding on to Gen Z then and going, well, okay, so how we've done boomers, them, how are Gen Z going to face up to this? So here's some depressing stuff actually for Gen Z. Given they're going to need to save for themselves, they're estimating in this survey in the Times that you're going to need a pension pot of roughly, by the time you get there, £3 million.
Wow.
So if you're a Gen Z today, by the time you get to
how much you got to save for that?
You've got to save, if you start now, £1,600 a month.
Fuck.
Now, that is only
that's
that's only if you want to be at a level where you are in a house mortgage-free,
Yeah.
with a pot that affords you a comfortable lifestyle.
Of course you do.
Yeah?
Though.
Not a minimum lifestyle.
Yeah.
When you say of course you do, most people don't have enough money today.
No,
for
I
a
know, but
comfortable
of course you
lifestyle.
would like to be in
Right.
it.
So if that's where
don't think-
if that's where you'd
yeah.
like to be, you need to start saving now.
But Gen Z
Yeah.
are literally the first generation to experience the world benefit from being left money.
Right.
Or considerable amount
Right.
of
So let's come on to that
property
then.
wealth, weren't they?
So you're right in that, and this is a bit of an imponderable because, as we know, Rachel Reeves is thinking of changing the inheritance tax aspects for this, right? Both for pensions and for the transfer of property, right? But conceptually,
they still might
it's
have.
true that Gen Z as a generation are they have the highest likelihood of receiving 6-figure, 7-figure property wealth transference.
Okay.
Because that kind of stuff didn't happen in previous generations.
Because houses are worth so much more as well.
So their sort of saving grace, if you like, could be the fact that when their parents die, they're going to get part of a house, proceeds of a house, whatever. Assuming the government don't screw up.
Yeah.
And tax that so heavily that they actually take half the benefit away.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that already with April 27 when they're going to put like pension pots into IHT, unless they change it.
Because they have been known to do a U-turn.
Yeah, they have. Oh, God, please do.
Absolutely.
But at the moment, they're going to put pension pots in the inheritance tax trap next April.
So spend it all.
We'll see if they put any further constraints on the tax rate. But that's something they will
So
get.
who wins in the pension then, in the retirement?
So on the retirement front, there's, again, it's the boomer thing. You can't, because of the gold-plated salary pension thing.
Those that have got it.
Those that have got it absolutely had it best. Gen X will have it tough, but will survive. And Gen Z's only hope, well, not only hope, but the thing that's going to help them the most
Is being left
is
money.
the transference of wealth from assets in either pension or property from their parents, which Gen X probably won't have or didn't have. And boomers certainly never had. Boomers never inherited anything. Okay. So there we go. That's kind of wraps it up. Now, one of the consequences of all of that for Gen Z, the latest generation, is that we are seeing them therefore have to delay all their major life milestones.
So marriage, kids, buying a house, retiring.
Yeah. All of those major life milestones are moving to the right.
So we're saying boomers had it best?
The real boomers,
the
real boomers with the defined benefit pensions, absolutely had it best. So there you go. We've settled that argument.
We have,
I think.
So when the kids say to us, "You had it, you didn't have it as tough as us," actually, we didn't.
The boomers didn't.
But we
haven't got all the characteristics of boomers, which is why I talked about the Gen X thing. So we're exposed to a number of the challenges that Gen X have.
Okay, so some.
Yeah. Right. That's us done, I think, for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hope you enjoyed that, just for a bit of fun. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.